Every Norwegian citizen, newborns included, has approximately $340,000 sitting in a government fund on their behalf. No Norwegian voted to create this system. That is not a scandal. That was the plan. Norway discovered oil in 1969. The country waited 27 years before depositing a single krone into a savings fund. That delay was not a failure of leadership. That delay was a feature, a sign that Norway was getting the model right. Most oil-producing nations follow a predictable path. Oil revenue enters government budgets directly. Politicians spend oil money on subsidies, infrastructure, and military expansion. Economists call the resulting damage the resource curse. The resource curse describes how abundant natural resources can weaken, rather than strengthen, an economy. Venezuela, Nigeria, and Angola have all experienced versions of the resource curse. Norway broke the pattern, not by accident, but by design. Phillips Petroleum discovered oil on the Norwegian continental shelf in December 1969. Early government responses were cautious and deeply conflicted. Norwegian economists warned that rapid oil spending would trigger inflation and wage distortions. The Skånland Commission in 1983 proposed separating oil revenues entirely from the government budget. Taxation on oil company profits would fund the state's share at a rate of 78%. The core idea was radical. Oil wealth belonged to future Norwegians, not just present ones. Years of parliamentary debate followed that commission report. Norway created the Government Pension Fund Global through legislation passed in 1990. The first actual transfer of funds happened 6 years later, in 1996. From that first deposit, the fund's growth would take decades to become world historic. The Norwegian government transfers all petroleum revenues directly into the fund. The fund is managed by Norges Bank Investment Management, known as NBIM. NBIM invests exclusively in assets outside Norway. Domestic Norwegian stocks and bonds are explicitly prohibited from the portfolio. That rule exists to prevent oil money from overheating the Norwegian domestic economy. Investing abroad exports the inflationary pressure along with the cash. Today, the fund holds equity stakes in more than 7,000 companies across 60 countries. The fund owns roughly 1.5% of all publicly listed stocks globally. Major holdings include Nvidia, Apple, Microsoft, Nestlé, and Samsung. The fund also owns prime real estate in London, New York, and Tokyo. As of end 2025, total fund value reached approximately $2 trillion, roughly $340,000 per Norwegian citizen. A fund this large attracts political pressure to spend generously. Norway anticipated that pressure and built a firewall against it. The fiscal rule, introduced in 2001, caps annual government withdrawals at 3% of total fund value. That 3% cap aligns with the expected real return on investments. Only investment returns enter the Norwegian budget. The principal stays permanently locked in. The spending rule has survived every government since 2001, left, right, and center. Cross-party political consensus on the rule is what makes the system durable. Critics argue Norway's model cannot be copied by poorer nations. Infrastructure deficits and institutional weakness make saving oil revenues politically impossible in many developing economies. Nigeria's government relied on oil revenues to fund basic state operations from the beginning. Saving while borrowing at high interest rates would have made no economic sense for Nigeria. Venezuela's oil sector was nationalized and used as a political tool long before savings discipline was possible. The resource curse is not primarily a financial failure, it is a governance failure. Norway succeeded because Norwegian institutions trusted each other enough to delay gratification across multiple governments and decades. There is also a less comfortable counterargument about Norway itself. More than half of the fund's current $2 trillion value comes from investment returns, not oil. Some economists argue Norway is now more dependent on fund returns than on oil revenue. The fund dropped 14.1% in 2022, losing $164 billion in 12 months. Norway's model is resilient, but it is not invincible. Norway turned temporary underground wealth into a permanent above-ground financial institution. The oil will eventually run out. The fund is designed to outlast it. The government pension fund global is now larger than the entire GDP of most nations. What Norway built is not just a savings account. Norway built a system designed to survive politicians, election cycles, and oil price crashes. The lesson for every resource-rich nation is not simply save your oil money. The lesson is build the institutions that make saving politically possible in the first place. In a future World Stages episode, we examine the Gulf sovereign wealth funds, Abu Dhabi, Kuwait, and Saudi Arabia. These funds are enormous, secretive, and built on a very different model than Norway's. If Norway's story made you think differently about how countries manage wealth, share this video with someone who would find it interesting.